I didn't expect much when I signed the lease for apartment 3B. The rent was suspiciously low for the part of the city I lived in, the building looked old but stable, and the landlord seemed vaguely uneasy about showing me inside. "It's cozy," he said with a strained smile, his eyes darting around the hall like he wanted to leave quickly. Cozy wasn't the word I would have chosen. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and the paint peeled in long, curling strips like dead skin. Still, I was desperate and moving into my own place felt like freedom, so I ignored the unease crawling up my spine and stepped inside. The apartment was small, almost claustrophobic. One bedroom, a kitchenette that had seen better decades, and a living room with a single window that barely let in the light. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the air feel thick and alive. As I unpacked, I noticed an odd detail: the walls seemed to swallow sound. Even the faint hum of the radiator felt muted, as if it were trying to disappear. I shook off the feeling. I'd always been sensitive to minor things, overthinking, imagining horrors that weren't real. At least, that's what I told myself. That night, I slept poorly. I kept hearing my own breathing, uneven, ragged. When I finally drifted off, I dreamt of whispers, not words I could make out, just the sound of voices pressing against my skull, urgent and demanding. I woke in a sweat, heart hammering, convinced I had imagined it. The apartment was quiet again. Too quiet. It was the next evening that the apartment revealed itself. I was cooking dinner when I muttered, almost absent-mindedly, "I hate this job." The words barely left my mouth when a faint echo returned, softer than my voice but unmistakable. "You hate this job." I froze, turning around. Nothing. Just the empty room, silent again. My heart skipped a beat. It was probably the acoustics, I told myself. Buildings do strange things. But then it happened again. Later, as I walked to the bathroom, I whispered, almost to test myself, "I'm afraid of being alone." The echo returned immediately, louder this time, clearer, the words curling in the air as if they were spoken by someone behind me. Afraid of being alone. My pulse shot through the roof. I spun around. The room was empty. The apartment had no neighbors above or below, no one could have spoken. My stomach twisted with unease. I tried ignoring it, convincing myself it was some quirk of the old building, some trick of the acoustics. I even recorded my voice on my phone, whispering mundane thoughts, hoping to catch the phenomenon in action. When I played it back, the recordings were normal. No echoes. No distortions. It only happened when I spoke in real time. And worse, sometimes, the echoes didn't just repeat my words, they added emphasis, extra syllables, an unnatural rhythm, like the apartment had its own voice. By the third day, I dreaded speaking aloud at all. The silence of the room was suffocating, yet speaking brought terror. When I accidentally muttered, "I lied to him yesterday," the echo came back almost immediately, louder, insistent. "You lied to him yesterday," but it didn't stop there. I swear I heard it continue, a low, whispering murmur I didn't recognize, saying things I hadn't even spoken, "And you'll lie again, and you'll hide it, forever." I staggered back, knocking a chair over. My reflection in the window showed wide, panicked eyes. I realized the room didn't just echo my words, it anticipated my fears, twisted them, amplified them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I moved, creaked, or muttered under my breath, the apartment answered, louder and more demanding. I tried whispering harmless things, even nonsense syllables, but the echoes ignored them. They fed only on truths, on secrets, on my guilt and shame. I could feel it watching, waiting for me to reveal more, feeding off the part of me I most wanted to hide. I began keeping a journal, writing down every secret, every fear, trying to empty my mind before sleep. But even then, the apartment found a way to reach me. One entry read, "I'm not sure I can trust myself anymore." I barely finished the sentence when I heard a whisper from the darkness of the room, you can't trust yourself." My hands shook. I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. Then came the night it spoke to me without prompt. I was lying in bed, eyes closed, trying to force sleep, when a low, deliberate voice, unmistakably real and terrifyingly close, said, "You think you can hide from me?" My heart froze. I bolted upright. The apartment was still. The air hung thick, almost solid, like a storm waiting to break. I realized I was trapped in a game I didn't understand. The apartment didn't just echo, it demanded confession. It wanted me to reveal everything. Every fear, every regret, every hidden sin. And it wanted more. I tried calling the landlord, friends, anyone, but no one could hear the voice, no one could sense the presence. I was alone with it, and it knew everything. Every whispered thought, every suppressed memory, it fed on them, turning them against me. My reflection in the darkened window seemed to flicker, morph, and I saw not just myself, but other faces, blurred, half-formed, staring from the shadows. They were waiting. By morning, I realized the truth: the apartment wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just alive. It was a predator, invisible yet intimately familiar, feeding on my conscience, my guilt, my secrets. And it was patient. I opened my mouth to speak, to test it again, to see if the echo would return. But the second the words formed, I stopped. Fear rooted me in place. Because deep down, I knew the echo wasn't just repeating, it was judging, twisting, promising that my own sins could destroy me. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard a faint, chilling whisper that made my blood run cold. "Tell me, your darkest one." The protagonist discovers the apartment isn't just echoing words, it feeds on secrets, guilt, and fears. By the end, it speaks directly to them, demanding their darkest secret, hinting that the apartment is far more malevolent and sentient than imagined. The first morning after the whisper, I couldn't bring myself to leave the bedroom. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound, the slightest creak, the faintest breath, that would indicate the apartment's attention. The silence was oppressive, almost tangible, yet I knew better than to trust it. The apartment never truly rested. Its patience was a predator's, and it was waiting. I finally gathered the courage to speak aloud, testing it, carefully, almost inaudibly. I cheated on the exam last year. At first, there was nothing. My heart slowed slightly, hope stirring that maybe my confession was enough. Then it came, a whisper, low and deliberate, twisting my words: "You cheated," and it went unnoticed. For now, the echo was no longer a simple repeat. It emphasized the shame, the fear, the guilt. And it didn't stop. I could hear the syllables stretched, drawn into a sinister cadence, becoming a chant I didn't know I had created. My stomach churned. The apartment didn't just reflect, it judged. By the third day, I couldn't ignore the changes. Objects in the apartment shifted subtly when I wasn't looking. A chair would be facing the wrong way, my notebook moved an inch closer to the corner of the room, the curtains slightly askew. At first, I thought exhaustion was making me paranoid. But the whispers confirmed it. They began commenting on the smallest actions, echoing my thoughts before I even articulated them. "You didn't lock the door, you left the keys on the counter." I realized with dread that the apartment was learning, anticipating, feeding on my awareness. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, debating whether to reach out for help. My thumb hovered over the contacts list when a whisper slithered into my ear: "No one can hear you. No one will believe." My hand froze. The voice had changed, it was no longer my own echo, but something alive, aware, and intimately familiar. It knew fear, it knew doubt, it knew how to isolate. My pulse raced, every instinct screaming to run. But the door was just a wall, the windows, merely portals to a world that could not touch this one. I was trapped in my own mind, and the apartment was the lock. Sleep became impossible. Each time I closed my eyes, I heard whispers from every corner of the room, threading together, forming sentences I couldn't comprehend at first. You hide, you lie, we remember, we judge. Sometimes the echoes repeated secrets I hadn't spoken aloud, whispers of shame and regret I had buried deep, memories of mistakes long forgotten. The apartment reached inside me, sifting through the darkness of my mind, drawing out truths I had never dared confess. By the 5th day, I tried to resist speaking at all. I wrote everything down in a journal, thinking perhaps silence and paper could shield me. But even then, the apartment found ways to invade. I would glance at a page I had just written, and letters would blur, words rearranging themselves, forming sentences I hadn't penned. You think writing can save you, it cannot. Panic surged through me. The room had become a living entity, bending reality subtly to assert dominance. I was no longer merely a resident, I was prey. The whispers grew more personal, almost intimate. They began probing the edges of my guilt and shame. You didn't tell her the truth, you ignored his calls, you lied to yourself. It was as if the apartment had access to every moral failing I had ever committed, pulling them from my memory and presenting them back with cruel clarity. I realized I had crossed a line. The apartment didn't just echo secrets. It demanded them. It fed on confession and punished withholding. My own silence was a form of defiance it would not tolerate. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a faint knock at the door. My heart jumped, but when I peered through the peephole, there was no one. The whispers responded immediately, mocking, "You hope for escape, there is none." I backed away. The door was solid, unyielding, yet the apartment had made the sound a weapon, turning my hope into fear. Every sound in the building now felt orchestrated, as if the walls themselves were conspiring against me. The true horror emerged when the apartment began speaking in sentences I had never spoken, forming threats and predictions. "Tonight, you will confess, or you will lose yourself." The words were clear, deliberate, unyielding. I tried to leave, tried to convince myself it was impossible, that it was some form of sleep-deprived hallucination. But the room reacted to every step I took, every thought I entertained. It was alive, and it had decided I was its focus. By the 6th night, desperation took over. I sat in the center of the room, lights on, notebook open, hands trembling, trying to pour every secret, every fear onto paper. The apartment responded in kind, twisting my words aloud, shaping them into a mockery of my confession. And then, finally, it spoke to me directly, its voice no longer a whisper but a low, rumbling presence. "Enough hiding. Tell me your darkest secret, or I will find it for you." The weight of its demand pressed on me like a physical force. I could feel my mind unraveling under the intensity. Every hidden sin, every suppressed memory, every unspoken shame threatened to surface at once. I realized that the apartment did not merely echo, it manipulated, it coerced, it hunted. The only way to survive was to speak, to confront the deepest parts of myself. But doing so meant revealing truths I had never admitted to anyone, not even myself. I opened my mouth to speak, trembling. The apartment's presence seemed to lean in closer, as if listening, waiting. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched, growing longer, darker, alive. And then, before a single word could leave my lips, the whisper came again, sharp and cruel. "No, not that one, the one you were most afraid to admit." Sleep had become a distant memory. Every attempt to close my eyes summoned whispers that circled my mind like predatory birds, echoing fears I had thought long buried. Even the daylight offered no reprieve. The apartment's oppressive presence seemed to cling to me, subtle but omnipresent, pressing against my consciousness like invisible hands. I began to notice small distortions in reality, objects subtly shifting when I wasn't looking, shadows that stretched too long or moved contrary to the light, corners darkening even when illuminated. The apartment had begun to expand its influence beyond sound, bending the world to its will. By now, speaking aloud had become a calculated risk. Each uttered word, no matter how mundane, returned with an unnatural cadence, warped, intensified, often ending with insinuations that had never crossed my mind. A simple, "I forgot to water the plant," became, "You forgot, again," neglect, "You cannot care," for anything, not even life. My own thoughts and minor mistakes were weaponized against me. I realized that the apartment had learned the architecture of my mind. It wasn't simply reacting anymore. It was anticipating, waiting to strike at the corners of my guilt and shame I had yet to reveal, and twisting them into threats. One evening, desperation took hold. I barricaded the doors and windows with whatever I could find: books, chairs, pillows. I whispered prayers and meaningless phrases to fill the silence, anything to confuse it, to regain control. But the apartment was patient and relentless. The whispers began responding in kind, forming sentences I hadn't even spoken. "You cannot escape your failures, your lies, your sins, all will be revealed." And then, the echoes shifted. It wasn't merely repeating my secrets anymore, it was inventing new ones. I heard the voice say things that were plausible but false, insinuations about actions I had never taken, twisting reality until even my own memory seemed unreliable. The apartment began warping the very space around me. Walls appeared to breathe, faintly pulsing as if alive. Shadows writhed along the floor, converging in the corners of the ceiling, stretching downward to brush against me. Even the furniture seemed sentient. A chair slid slowly toward me as if nudged by unseen fingers, the kettle rattled on the counter without cause, and the refrigerator hummed a low, sinister tune. Every object seemed to whisper, "We are watching, we are waiting, we know." I could no longer distinguish between my thoughts and the apartment's manipulations. Every sound, every flicker of movement was a potential threat, a demand, a test. By the fourth night, I was exhausted, paranoid, and trembling. I had begun talking to myself incessantly, rehearsing secrets, forcing words into confessions before the apartment could manufacture them. The echoes responded immediately, weaving my words into twisted variations, emphasizing my shame, sometimes inventing consequences I had never feared. "You stole from him, and no one knows." "But we do, we always know." I realized then that the apartment was no longer confined to echoes. It was a mirror of my conscience, a living extension of my fear and guilt, and it would not relent until I delivered something truly damning, my darkest, most inescapable secret. I tried distraction. I played music, read aloud from books, even hummed nonsensical tunes. But the apartment adapted, ignoring irrelevant noise and focusing with laser precision on my vulnerabilities. The whispers began forming sentences before I even spoke, predicting what I might confess, what I might fear, what I might hide. It was no longer reactive, it was proactive, a predator reading my mind, shaping my reality to force confrontation. The real terror began when I saw movement that could not belong to me. Shadows coalesced into shapes that resembled human forms, pale and indistinct, but unmistakably alive. Faces flickered in the darkness, expressions warped in silent screams, eyes hollow and accusatory. They crowded the corners of the room, surrounding me, yet dissolving whenever I tried to focus on them directly. And then the apartment spoke in unison through these apparitions, the voice low and insistent, "Reveal it, the secret you fear most, or we will reveal it for you." My chest tightened. My knees buckled. The demand was absolute, impossible to ignore. I sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, whispering fragments of truth into the air. The apartment listened, twisted, and amplified them, but nothing seemed to satiate it. I realized with a cold certainty that it wasn't the act of confession alone that the apartment wanted. It craved the confrontation with the self, the voluntary unraveling of my own defenses, the raw acknowledgement of my deepest guilt. It fed on honesty, not just exposure. My mind screamed for escape, but escape was impossible. The apartment had stretched itself into my perception, my awareness, even my memory. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. A whisper, clear, deliberate, almost benevolent in tone, but impossibly wrong, spoke my name. "Tell me, the one you can't even admit to yourself." I froze, horrified. The apartment wasn't merely echoing anymore. It was probing, digging into my subconscious, rooting out the sin, the shame, the secret I had spent my entire life burying. I felt it inside me, twisting my thoughts, making my own mind a weapon against me. My hand shook as I reached for my journal. I began writing frantically, words spilling onto the page faster than I could process. But the apartment intervened, twisting my pen in my hand, making letters smear and reorder themselves. My confessions became grotesque, distorted versions of my own guilt, some true, some invented, but all believable, all damning. I realized with a suffocating dread that the apartment was no longer just observing, it was participating. It was co-writing my sins, fabricating realities that might not have existed, but felt terrifyingly true. As I collapsed to the floor, gasping, the shadows in the corners of the room coalesced into a single form, a figure indistinct but unmistakably human. It leaned toward me, whispering, "We know everything, all you hide, all you fear, it belongs to us now, and we are patient." My vision blurred. My heart hammered. My entire body trembled with a terror I could not name. I realized, with a clarity that was almost a release, that there was only one path forward: confrontation. I had to speak the secret I feared most, fully and without hesitation, or the apartment would continue shaping my reality into a nightmare from which I could never awaken. My soul felt raw, exposed, but I understood, survival depended not on silence, not on avoidance, but on surrendering fully to truth, the one truth I had hidden even from myself. The apartment escalates further, manipulating objects, shadows, and reality itself. It forms human-like apparitions and directly probes the protagonist's subconscious, demanding the deepest, most hidden secret. The protagonist realizes that only confronting their darkest truth fully will allow any chance of survival, but the fear of what they might reveal is paralyzing. The night stretched on, thick and suffocating, each second a pulse of unseen pressure. The apartment no longer merely responded, it dictated my actions. My journal lay open on the floor, its pages scribbled with fragments of confessions that felt simultaneously true and false. Every word I wrote was twisted, reformed, amplified by the whispers that slithered like snakes along the walls. I tried to read what I had written, but the sentences rearranged themselves before my eyes, forming new accusations, new insinuations. The apartment was not just alive, it was conscious, deliberate, omnipotent within this space. I curled into a ball on the floor, my ears straining for even the faintest respite. But the silence was a trap. The apartment spoke in subtleties now, shaping the air itself into a conduit for its voice. "You think hiding helps, it never did, it never will, we know." It wasn't just my own voice echoing back, it was a chorus of my fears, a thousand iterations of what I had avoided acknowledging, spoken simultaneously. Each syllable drilled into my skull, rattling bones I hadn't realized were brittle with guilt. As I lay there, I felt a pressure at my temples, a sense that the apartment had expanded into me, into the space between neurons, the gap between thoughts. The shadows in the corners began to pulse rhythmically, like the beating of a monstrous heart. And then I saw them, faces, blurred and half-formed, stretching and twisting across the walls. Some were familiar, echoes of people I had wronged, ghosts of fleeting transgressions. Others were strange, almost alien, yet somehow intimately tied to my own psyche. They stared, waiting. Patient. Hungry. Judgmental. I attempted to speak, to wrest some semblance of control by uttering a secret, but my voice caught in my throat. The apartment wasn't merely coaxing me to confess, it was constructing the words I feared, creating narratives I had never dared imagine. I could hear a whisper form sentences I didn't know I had thought: "You forgot her birthday, you let him down, you cheated, you lied, you failed." The intensity was unbearable. I felt my mind fragmenting, each memory a shard, each regret a blade against my consciousness. Hours, or was it minutes, passed in a liminal haze. I began to realize the apartment was teaching me, shaping me, forcing me to confront parts of myself I had long ignored. The whispers shifted, probing further. You avoid responsibility, you hide from pain, you fear yourself, confess, confess. Each phrase was surgical, unrelenting. I wanted to flee, to smash the walls, to leave this place, but the apartment responded to intention. Even the thought of escape summoned shadows closer, forming near my bed, circling, whispering, a mockery of the pursuit I could not undertake. Desperation drove me to my knees. I whispered another fragment, tiny, almost hesitant. I lied to my friend. The echoes returned, low and distorted. You lied, and the consequences, you ignored. The pain, it festers, always. The apartment was no longer content with passive manipulation, it was reshaping my perception of time, dragging hours into minutes, minutes into eternal stretches of dread. Each confession birthed new questions, new shame. Each echo carved away at my certainty, leaving only fear and raw vulnerability. I tried writing again, journal in hand, pen trembling. As I scrawled, the apartment intervened, bending my words on the page. Even here, even now, your attempts to control are futile. All will be revealed. We hunger, we always hunger. The letters seemed to lift off the paper, forming arcs of light and shadow in the dim glow of the lamp. The room itself was alive, breathing, twisting around me. The shadows weren't just on the walls anymore, they were under the furniture, in the cracks of the floorboards, curling around my feet as I sat paralyzed. A sudden movement made me flinch. The corner of the room darkened further, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was indistinct, hazy, yet it carried the unmistakable shape of a human. Its head tilted unnaturally, eyes hollow, lips forming words I couldn't hear. Then, as though pulled closer by unseen threads, the voice reached my mind directly. Do you dare say it aloud, the one you hide even from yourself? I felt my body freeze. My very soul recoiled. The secret I had long buried, the one memory I had never faced, rose in my mind like a tide I could not hold back. The apartment leaned in closer, in a presence I could not see but could feel everywhere. It wasn't threatening anymore, it was expectant, patient, demanding. Every whisper, every shadow, every shift in the room was an interrogation. The walls themselves seemed to close in, the air heavy with anticipation. I realized with a terrifying clarity that I was no longer an observer, I was a participant in the apartment's ritual. The room did not simply echo, it consumed, it reflected, it shaped me. Survival meant confrontation. The apartment would not stop until I named the thing I feared most about myself. I felt tears streak my face as I mouthed fragments of confessions, hesitant and trembling. I hurt her. I betrayed him. I lied. The echoes amplified, twisting, adding layers of accusation I could scarcely recognize as mine. I saw the shadows convulse in pleasure at my suffering, whispering new horrors I hadn't confessed. And then came a pause, a silence so deep it was almost tangible. My chest heaved, lungs burning. I knew the apartment was waiting for the final step. A single, low whisper slithered across the floorboards, sinking into the cracks and corners of the room. The one you fear most, the one that defines you, tell it, or we will make you live it. The words penetrated my skull, resonating with my very being. My body shook uncontrollably. I realized that the ultimate test had arrived. To survive, I had to confront the deepest, darkest truth about myself, a truth so horrifying, so intimately mine, that speaking it might unmake me entirely. I opened my mouth, trembling, the air thick with anticipation, knowing that the next words could seal my fate. But just as I began to whisper, the lights flickered, the shadows pulsed, and a sound erupted from the walls, a chorus of whispers, laughter, and screams, all at once. I froze, every nerve on fire. The apartment was no longer waiting. It was about to act. And then, a single, chilling phrase cut through the chaos, unmistakable. The apartment intensifies its psychological assault, manipulating perception. The echo begins. And space. Shadows form into near-human apparitions, and the protagonist is forced to confront their deepest, most hidden fears. the echo threatens to fully consume them, escalating toward the first major confrontation with the apartment's sentient power. The echoes began to bleed into every aspect of my existence. By morning, my journal had become a weapon against me. The apartment twisted every word, every fragment of thought into something darker, more accusatory. Even my reflection no longer belonged solely to me. In the glass of the window, I saw not only my own pale, terrified face but fleeting glimpses of others, faces I recognized and didn't recognize, twisted in fear, guilt, and accusation. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as I stared, unable to look away. The apartment was no longer confined to sound, nor even to shadows. It had begun to shape reality itself, warping it to fit its insatiable hunger for my confession. By the second night, my resolve had crumbled. I whispered fragmented truths, small admissions meant to satiate it. I lied. I cheated. I hurt her. The apartment absorbed them, distorting each syllable into horrific variations. You hurt, and you will hurt. The guilt is yours forever. I realized that partial confessions were worthless. The apartment demanded total surrender, a full confrontation with every secret I had buried, every fear I had ignored, every guilt I had carefully hidden from myself. The apartment began to shift the very floor beneath me. The hardwood groaned, bending and curving as if alive. Shadows converged into shapes that resembled my past, distorted memories of failure, betrayal, and shame. Faces of those I had wronged, blurred and horrific, stared at me from the walls, mouthing accusations I could not decipher. Every object, every surface, pulsed with expectation, and I felt the room breathe in unison with my own rapid inhalations. It was patient, insidious, aware of every thought before I had fully formed it. I began to feel the first cracks in my perception of time. Hours bled together, and I could no longer discern day from night. The whispers became constant, omnipresent, forming sentences before my lips could even shape them. You cannot hide. Your sins belong to us. Confess or be consumed. It was no longer mere voice, it was presence, intent, and judgment all at once. Every attempt to block it, to focus on mundane distractions, failed. The apartment anticipated, adjusted, and countered with an efficiency that made my blood run cold. At some point during the endless night, I realized it was no longer just my secrets the apartment demanded. It wanted understanding, recognition, and complete ownership of every misdeed, fear, and regret I had ever tried to suppress. Every memory I tried to block was pulled into the light, magnified, distorted, and returned to me as accusation. It became impossible to separate reality from manipulation. Even my own thoughts began to echo back to me with cruel amplification. The apartment had become a mirror of my soul, and I was staring into its monstrous reflection. I tried fleeing the room. I grabbed my coat, reached for the doorknob, but the apartment responded instantly. The shadows lengthened across the hallway, thick and dark, forming almost solid barriers. The air pressed against me, cold and viscous, a physical resistance I could not overcome. My attempts to scream were swallowed, replaced by an echoing laughter that formed words I had never uttered. You think escape is possible, it never was. The walls know, the floor remembers, the ceiling watches. Panic surged through me like electricity. The apartment had extended itself into the very structure, the physicality of the space bending to trap me. Then came the first direct interaction. A figure emerged from the darkest corner of the room, more solid than the shifting shadows, more human than anything I had seen before. Its features were familiar yet grotesque, an amalgamation of my own fears and the distorted faces of those I had wronged. It extended a hand toward me, and its voice, my voice, and not my voice, whispered, "You cannot survive this without truth. Give it. Now. Name it. Own it." The figure stepped closer, the air vibrating with a hum that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. I stumbled backward, tripping over the journal, feeling as though the room was closing in. I sank to the floor, trembling. The walls seemed to lean in, the ceiling pressing downward. The shadows writhed, forming appendages that reached toward me like living fingers. I felt every mistake I had made in my life, the betrayals, the lies, the small cruelties, the moments of selfishness, each amplified, each twisting into a weapon. I understood then that silence was no longer an option. The apartment would not allow me to hide. Confession was the only way to survive. But the thing I had long feared most, the secret I had kept even from myself, loomed like a shadow over my mind. Naming it meant confronting the essence of who I truly was, and the truth was unbearable. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I no longer knew. I whispered fragments, desperate, half-formed, hoping to distract it, to buy time. The apartment listened, and then reshaped my words, building a crescendo of accusation. You try to deceive, but we know, all of it, every hidden shame, every fear, every sin. The figure in the corner grew taller, more defined, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The air thickened. I could feel the pressure of judgment, a force pressing against my very mind, demanding obedience, demanding honesty. And then, for the first time, the apartment gave me a choice, not a real choice, but a terrifying semblance of one. Confess my deepest, most shameful secret aloud, or let the apartment find it on its own. I felt the gravity of every suppressed thought, every hidden memory, and realized I had been running from myself my entire life. The apartment was not merely echoing, it was holding up a mirror so brutal, so complete, that denial was impossible. I opened my mouth to speak, shaking violently, and my hands clutched the journal as if it were a lifeline. The shadows leaned in. The figure extended its hand. The apartment's voice, low and omnipotent, filled the room. Tell us, the one you fear most, or it will be taken, and you will be nothing. I realized then, with a clarity that froze me to my core, that the moment of confrontation had arrived. The echoes were no longer whispers, they were demands, inevitabilities. Survival required truth, but the truth I feared to name could unravel my very identity. And I understood, with sickening certainty, that whatever I said next would change everything. The apartment forces the protagonist to face their ultimate hidden secret, presenting an impossible choice: confess it willingly or have the apartment uncover it, potentially consuming them entirely. The tension has reached a peak, leading toward the first major psychological confrontation. The moment I opened my mouth, the apartment seemed to lean closer, the air thickening with an almost tangible pressure, as if the walls themselves were inhaling in anticipation. My lips quivered, my throat constricted, and every nerve in my body screamed that speaking the truth could unmake me entirely. But I had no choice. The whispers, the shadows, the figure in the corner, they all demanded it. I inhaled shakily, forcing words out in a trembling whisper. I betrayed her. I let her down when she trusted me most. The response was immediate. The echo returned, not merely repeating my words but distorting them into a chorus of accusation. You betrayed, you failed, the trust, gone forever. The shadows seemed to pulse with satisfaction, the figure stretching taller, more solid, more human in its form. The room vibrated with anticipation, every object humming as if alive. But the moment of relief I expected did not arrive. Instead, I felt a surge of panic. I had revealed one secret, but the apartment wanted the full spectrum of my guilt, the ultimate truth I had long buried. I realized then that partial confession was a trap. The apartment craved completeness, the raw essence of my hidden self. Every attempt to obscure, to soften, to rationalize only intensified its presence. The walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat that matched my own, the shadows elongating, coiling like snakes around my limbs, whispering fragments of memories I had tried to forget. You think one truth suffices, it never does. All must be revealed, all will be revealed. The sound reverberated through my skull, drilling into my consciousness, demanding compliance. I sank to the floor, gripping my journal as if it could anchor me to sanity. My hands trembled violently, and tears streaked down my face. I began whispering every minor sin I could recall, moments of selfishness, lies to friends, failures of courage, betrayals both great and small. The apartment responded to each fragment, shaping them, amplifying them, twisting them into grotesque reflections of guilt. I could hear my own voice in a dozen variations, each accusing, each cruel, each impossible to ignore. Time fractured. Hours stretched into eternities. I lost count of how many times I whispered confessions, watched shadows shift and twist, and felt the figure draw closer. The room itself seemed to bend and fold, walls warping inward and outward, the floor rippling beneath me. The apartment was no longer just an observer or manipulator, it was an architect, reconstructing reality around my fear, shaping it to elicit complete submission. Then, amidst the chaos, I glimpsed something new, another figure emerging from the darkness, smaller, fainter, but unmistakably present. It was me, or at least a version of me I had long denied. The reflection-like figure stared with hollow eyes, mouth moving in silence, lips shaping words I could not hear. And yet, somehow, I understood, it was my guilt, my shame, made flesh, a living embodiment of all I had hidden. My stomach churned as I realized that the apartment was externalizing my psyche, forcing me to confront the parts of myself I had buried so deeply that even I had forgotten them. I tried to speak to the figure, to reason, to plead, but my own voice seemed inadequate. The apartment responded immediately, echoing fragments of my internal dialogue, twisting them into accusations. You think you can escape, you cannot, all you hide, all you fear, belongs to us. My chest tightened, lungs burning, as if the room itself were constricting me. I could feel every heartbeat, every tremor, every whispered confession feeding it, strengthening it, shaping it into something insatiable and omnipotent. Desperation overtook me. I began muttering secrets too horrifying to fully articulate, betrayals that had haunted me for years, sins that I had carefully hidden even from myself, mistakes that had fractured relationships and left scars. The apartment absorbed each word, each syllable, twisting them into distorted echoes, forming new permutations of guilt I had never imagined. The figure in the corner reached toward me, more real than ever, and I felt an almost magnetic pull, an inevitability that I could not resist. Then came the ultimate test. The apartment's voice, low, omnipotent, and unyielding, filled every corner of the room, the one you fear most, the truth you deny even in your soul. Speak it now, or we will speak it for you. My mind screamed, every fiber of my being resisting. But I knew, with a clarity that made my blood run cold, that silence was no longer an option. To survive, I had to confront the absolute darkest corner of myself, the truth that had defined my life in secrecy, the sin I had never dared name. My body shook violently as I whispered the first fragment, then the second. The apartment responded instantly, echoing, distorting, amplifying, constructing a horrifying symphony of guilt. The shadows writhed, forming faces I had wronged, memories I had repressed, a chorus of accusation that pressed upon me from every direction. My own reflection in the window flickered, morphing into scenes of my failings, playing like a film of shame projected back at me. I realized then that the apartment didn't just feed on guilt, it thrived on recognition, forcing me to see my own sins reflected in reality, twisted and unavoidable. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. I no longer distinguished day from night. My whispered confessions became a litany, each one more personal, more damning than the last. The apartment responded in kind, intensifying the echoes, warping shadows, shaping every sound, every light, every space into instruments of psychological torment. And then, the figure in the corner reached a final arm toward me, the air humming with expectation. A single, low whisper slithered through the room, sinking into my chest, my mind, my very soul, the ultimate truth, the one you hide even from yourself. Speak it, or lose yourself completely. My throat closed. My hands trembled. Every instinct screamed to resist. And yet, deep within, I knew that this confrontation was unavoidable. Whatever secret I had buried, whatever sin I had denied, it would emerge, through me, or through the apartment. There was no alternative. The echoes had begun their final descent, their hunger approaching climax. The room was alive, patient, and inevitable. I realized, with a terror that made my entire being quake, that the next words I spoke would define everything. The apartment waited. The shadows waited. The echoes waited. And I had no choice but to surrender to the truth that had been waiting in the deepest recess of my mind, the truth I had never dared confront. The apartment forces the protagonist toward a confrontation with their ultimate hidden truth. Time and reality warp as shadows and figures embody past guilt and shame. The protagonist faces the inevitability, speak their darkest secret or be consumed entirely by the apartment. The moment hung suspended, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself had coagulated into a living, watching entity. Every shadow in the room stretched and writhed, pulsing with a rhythm that mirrored my racing heartbeat. My trembling hands clutched the journal like a lifeline, yet I knew it was no shield. The apartment did not merely respond to my words anymore, it anticipated them, shaping reality around my hesitation. Even breathing felt like an act of defiance, and the room seemed to whisper in disapproval, even this, even the smallest act, is ours to judge. The figure in the corner, the embodiment of my guilt, my shame, my unspoken sins, leaned closer, its vague outline flickering like firelight against the walls. Its eyes, hollow and accusing, seemed to pierce straight through me, reaching into the recesses of my mind where my darkest secret hid. I realized with icy dread that it didn't merely want my confession. It demanded total surrender, a complete acknowledgement of every hidden truth that had shaped my choices, my fears, my failures. Partial admission would not suffice. The apartment hungered for completeness. I forced myself to speak, a whisper breaking through the oppressive silence. I betrayed her trust. I let her suffer for my own gain. The response was immediate and horrifying. The echoes returned, a chorus of my voice, distorted and amplified, filling the room. You betrayed, you lied, you hurt, and yet you hide still. Each syllable vibrated against my chest, coiling around my ribs like invisible tendrils. I staggered backward, tripping over the journal, and the apartment seemed to respond to my faltering resolve. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the walls and ceiling, forming grotesque shapes that mimicked scenes from my past, scenes I had tried to forget, twisted now into nightmarish tableaus. The temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my own breath curling in the air as if I were outside in winter, though the apartment's radiators hummed gently, mocking the contradiction. A low hum began, resonating from the walls themselves, vibrating in tandem with the pulses of the shadows. The apartment was alive. I could feel it, its presence seeping into my bones, insinuating itself into every thought, every heartbeat. The whispers intensified, forming sentences before I even thought them. You cannot escape, you cannot hide, every sin, every fear, belongs to us now. Then came the first tactile encounter. Something cold brushed against my arm, soft and deliberate, like fingers of smoke. I spun, expecting to see another figure, but the room appeared empty. Yet the sensation persisted, an undeniable, deliberate touch. The apartment was no longer confined to echoes or shadows. It had become physical, a force capable of manifesting sensations directly in my body. Panic surged. I could not flee. The door, once a barrier, now felt like a thin membrane, unable to contain the entity that had fully awakened. I sank to the floor, gasping, clutching the journal as if it could anchor me to sanity. I began whispering every hidden misdeed I could recall, desperate to satisfy it, moments of betrayal, selfishness, cowardice, lies to friends, omissions that caused harm. The apartment absorbed them instantly, amplifying the echoes into a chorus that seemed to surround me from all sides. Every word I uttered spawned new shadows, new faces, new accusations. The figure in the corner reached closer, its hand nearly solid now, fingers stretching as though to pull me into the darkness. The room itself began to distort more violently. The walls bent and warped, angles twisting impossibly. The ceiling lowered slightly, pressing down on me, while the floor seemed to ripple under my weight. Every object, books, lamps, chairs, shifted subtly, forming lines and shapes that guided my gaze toward the corner where the figure loomed. I realized with horror that the apartment's manipulation extended beyond sound and shadow. It could reshape space itself, bending reality to enforce confrontation. And then the whispers began to speak directly into my mind. Not echoes of my voice, not amplified confessions, but something far more invasive. They articulated thoughts I had barely allowed myself to consider, fears I had buried deep. You think you are innocent, you think you can hide, the truth is already here, we see it all, we have always seen it. I trembled violently. My own mind had become the theater for my torment. The apartment had claimed ownership of my consciousness, leaving no sanctuary, no refuge. I understood then that I was on the precipice of complete psychological collapse. The figure in the corner, more solid now, loomed closer, its shadow stretching across the room to touch my knees. My journal slipped from my hands, pages fluttering open to blank sheets that quickly filled with writing I did not create, confessions I had never thought to articulate. The apartment was not only demanding truth, it was fabricating it from my own guilt, forcing me to confront versions of myself I could scarcely recognize. The final escalation arrived silently. The apartment's voice, low, omnipotent, enveloped the entire space. The truth you hide even from yourself, name it, acknowledge it, own it, or be unmade. My knees buckled beneath me, tears streaking my face. My mind screamed against the inevitability, but I realized the terrible clarity. The next words I spoke would determine whether I survived or was consumed entirely. Every shadow, every whisper, every warped reflection of my sins waited. The apartment hungered for the final confession, and it would not be denied. I inhaled shakily, the full weight of my fear pressing down like 1,000 invisible hands. The apartment leaned closer, not a physical entity but a presence, omnipresent and undeniable. The figure in the corner stretched its arm toward me. The echoes of my own voice merged with others, a chorus of accusation and expectation that filled every corner of the room. And then the voice, both mine and not mine, whispered one final, chilling command. Speak it, or be nothing. The apartment's influence reaches its peak. It manipulates space, time, shadows, and even physical sensations to force the protagonist to confront their ultimate hidden truth. Reality itself bends, and the final confrontation looms, either confession or total psychological annihilation. The air grew impossibly dense, thick with expectation and malice. Every molecule seemed to vibrate with the apartment's awareness, responding to my every heartbeat, my every breath. My body shook violently as I tried to summon the courage to speak the ultimate truth. Every instinct screamed against it, warning that voicing this secret could unmake me entirely, but the apartment's presence brooked no hesitation. Shadows stretched and writhed across the walls like living tendrils, reaching for me, pressing against my skin, whispering promises of exposure and torment. I could feel the figure in the corner growing, solidifying into something almost fully human yet impossibly grotesque. Its hollow eyes bore into my soul, judging, accusing, demanding. The whispers had multiplied, forming a chorus that filled every corner of my mind, merging with my own thoughts until I could no longer distinguish between my voice and theirs. The truth you hide, the one even you deny, name it, surrender it, or be devoured. The words were not just heard, they were felt, vibrating in my chest, rattling my bones, embedding themselves into my consciousness. Trembling, I fell to my knees, hands clutching my head as the echoes pressed in from all directions. Memories I had buried deep began surfacing, unbidden, distorted, horrifying. Scenes of betrayal, selfishness, cruelty, and cowardice played before me like warped film reels projected across the walls. Each memory was amplified, twisted, reshaped into evidence of my failings. The apartment had become an inescapable mirror of my soul, exposing every corner of darkness I had tried to hide even from myself. And then the final secret, the one I had feared to acknowledge for decades, surfaced in my mind with unbearable clarity. It was a sin I had long denied, a betrayal so profound that even contemplating it made my stomach churn and my vision blur. My lips trembled as I struggled to force the words out. The apartment leaned closer, omnipresent and omniscient, the shadows stretching to engulf the room. The whispers coalesced into a single, urgent voice: "Speak it, confess, surrender, or be erased." I opened my mouth, the words trembling and broken. I killed him." Immediately, the room reacted. Shadows recoiled and then surged, twisting into grotesque, writhing forms that mirrored my fear. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with a malevolent rhythm. The figure in the corner reached toward me, fingers elongated and spectral, almost brushing my trembling form. The echoes amplified my confession, repeating it in dozens of variations, each one more damning than the last. The apartment did not merely listen, it celebrated, feasting on the unburdening of my deepest, darkest guilt. Yet relief did not follow. Instead, the apartment shifted, bending reality in ways I could scarcely comprehend. The floor undulated beneath me, the ceiling lowered, and the shadows began to move independently, weaving together into semi-solid shapes that mimicked every horror I had ever imagined. I realized with a cold, sinking dread that confession alone was not enough. The apartment demanded comprehension, acknowledgement, ownership, not simply the admission of sin but the full recognition of its weight, its consequences, its truth in every facet of my existence. Time fractured completely. Hours and minutes collapsed into a continuous present, each second stretching into eternity. The echoes no longer repeated my confession, they transformed it, expanding it into a vast narrative of guilt and accountability, connecting every past transgression into a single, unbroken chain of consequence. The figure in the corner became a towering reflection of my own psyche, a distorted amalgamation of my fears, my shame, and my hidden self. It reached down, voice a whisper of wind and shadow. "Do you understand now, the life you shaped, the weight of what you carried, the reality you ignored?" I felt tears streak my face, shaking violently, gasping for air that felt thick and unbreathable. The apartment was no longer a room. It was a living entity, conscious, deliberate, patient, and insatiable. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every vibration of the floor and walls conspired to force me into the ultimate confrontation with myself. I could not flee, could not resist, could not hide. The echoes demanded total acknowledgement, and I realized with a terrifying clarity that the apartment's power derived from the depth of my acceptance of guilt. And then the walls began to dissolve. The shadows receded into nothingness, and the apartment's presence condensed into a single, oppressive figure hovering before me. Its voice was no longer whispered, it was absolute, omnipotent. "You have confessed. You have revealed your truth. Do you understand what it means to live with this knowledge, fully, utterly, without denial?" I could not respond. The words echoed through my very soul. The apartment was no longer demanding, it was teaching, forcing me to comprehend the full weight of my existence, my sins, my failures, and the consequences that had shaped me. As I trembled on the floor, the journal lay open beside me. The pages were blank again, yet I knew they held the record of everything I had confessed, everything I had acknowledged, every hidden aspect of myself. The apartment had absorbed it all, transformed it, and returned it as understanding. And yet, even in that moment, I felt the presence of the room lingering, patient and vigilant, a reminder that this confrontation was not the end but the precursor to the final reckoning. I realized then that the room was not simply a prison or a tormentor. It was a mirror, a teacher, a reflection of the self stripped of denial. And while the echoes had brought me to the edge of my psyche, the ultimate test, the complete integration of my guilt, my truth, and my survival, was yet to come. The protagonist finally confronts their deepest, darkest secret, confessing it aloud. The apartment shifts reality and amplifies the confession, forcing full comprehension of guilt and consequence. Relief is temporary, the true reckoning is yet to come, setting the stage for the ultimate climax. The air grew impossibly still, yet charged with an invisible energy that pressed down on me from all sides. The apartment had transformed completely, no longer simply a room, it had become a vast, shifting reflection of my psyche. Shadows twisted into impossible geometries, walls rippled like water, and the ceiling stretched into darkness that seemed infinite. Every sound I had ever made, the whispers, the confessions, even my own heartbeat, reverberated across the warped space, forming a symphony of accusation and expectation. I could feel it in my bones. The ultimate confrontation was imminent. The figure in the corner had multiplied. Dozens of reflections emerged, each one a warped version of myself, embodying fear, guilt, and shame. They swirled around me, murmuring in voices that were mine and not mine simultaneously. Do you truly understand the depth of what you hid, the life you shaped in denial, the consequences you never faced? I shuddered, realizing that my past, my mistakes, and my hidden truths were not just memories, they were now physical presences, active and sentient, waiting for me to fully acknowledge them. I tried to speak again, to articulate the breadth of my confession, but the words failed me. The apartment responded instantly, bending reality further, warping the floor beneath me into a black, mirrored surface that reflected infinite versions of myself. Each reflection whispered a variation of my ultimate secret, magnifying it, twisting it into grotesque permutations. I staggered backward, the mirrored floor rippling like water, distorting every movement, every expression, every nuance of guilt into a living hallucination. A sudden sound made me freeze, a low, resonant hum emanating from the walls themselves. It was not a sound but a vibration, a message, a presence made audible and tactile at the same time. The apartment had begun to manipulate my very perception, blending sight, sound, and touch into a single overwhelming assault. The shadows formed arms and faces, reaching toward me, and I felt my soul trembling under the weight of inevitable reckoning. The whispers merged into a single, commanding voice. You have confessed, but confession is not the end. Do you accept the full weight of what you revealed? I collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down my face, every muscle trembling. My own reflections circled me, each one a fragmented accusation, a reminder of the life I had built in deception and denial. I could feel the apartment's presence everywhere, under my skin, in my lungs, in my mind. It pressed me to the core, demanding full integration of truth, a total surrender of pretense and denial. For the first time, I realized the apartment was not merely punishing me, it was forcing me to confront and accept the entirety of my being. Then, the whispers shifted. No longer mere echoes, they began to form coherent sentences, recounting memories I had long suppressed, magnifying their significance, connecting them like threads in a tapestry of guilt and consequence. Scenes I had avoided, people I had wronged, choices I had denied, each was projected in vivid, tangible detail across the warped walls and ceiling. The room became a theater of my life, an unrelenting, immersive projection that left me gasping for breath. Every attempt to flee, every attempt to resist, was met with immediate correction, shadows blocking exits, whispers distorting intentions, and reflections amplifying my fears. And then, a new presence emerged, a figure taller, more defined, more terrifying than all the reflections combined. It exuded a palpable authority, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to penetrate every layer of my mind. Its voice was neither whisper nor echo, it resonated directly inside my skull, bypassing ears entirely. You have confessed, you have acknowledged, but comprehension is incomplete. Only by fully embracing the truth can you survive what comes next. The shadows recoiled momentarily, forming a circle around the new figure, which extended its hands toward me. The room itself shivered, the walls bending and folding inward, the ceiling stretching impossibly upward, and the floor fracturing beneath me. The apartment had become not merely sentient but omnipotent within its domain, bending every law of reality to force me into the final trial. I understood then that the climax was imminent, the ultimate test of my courage, my acceptance, and my very soul. I whispered, barely audible, I understand. I accept. The figure's presence intensified, shadows rippling in approval, echoes vibrating in response, and the air itself seeming to thrum with anticipation. I realized, though, that the apartment would not release me without complete and total surrender. The final phase would demand more than confession, it would demand immersion, living through the consequences, embracing the horror fully. Every fiber of my being trembled in anticipation, knowing that what came next could irrevocably reshape who I was, or end me entirely. And then, as if responding to the final whisper, the apartment's voice grew omnipresent, omnipotent, and terrifyingly calm. The echo is complete, but the truth must be lived, or all is lost. The apartment escalates the trial to its ultimate phase, forcing the protagonist to fully integrate their guilt and confront their sins as living, sentient presences. The final confrontation looms, with reality bending completely and the apartment preparing for the ultimate reckoning. The apartment was no longer a room. It had become a living, breathing entity, a vast chamber of memory, guilt, and shadow. The walls rippled like liquid, the ceiling stretched into darkness, and the floor fractured into endless reflections of myself, versions I did not recognize, yet somehow knew. The echoes had multiplied into a deafening chorus, layering my whispered confessions into an overwhelming symphony of judgment. I realized, with a terror that froze my very soul, that the apartment had absorbed not only my words but the essence of my fear, shaping it into a tangible force that could bend reality itself. The towering figure emerged from the shadows, the culmination of my guilt, shame, and denial. Its eyes glowed with unnatural light, piercing into the deepest recesses of my mind. Its hands, elongated and spectral, reached toward me. Every fiber of my being screamed to resist, to flee, but the apartment had removed every exit, every avenue of escape. Shadows swirled and coiled around me, pressing against my body like living chains. I understood then that survival required more than confession, it demanded total surrender, the full acknowledgement of every hidden sin, every suppressed thought, every regret I had buried in the darkest corners of my soul. I fell to my knees, trembling violently, whispering fragments of truth. I lied. I betrayed. I hurt. I abandoned. I killed. The echoes roared in response, distorting and amplifying each word into dozens of horrifying permutations. Faces of those I had wronged emerged from the shadows, twisted and accusing, pressing toward me from all sides. The figure extended its hand further, the shadows parting in its presence, and I felt an irresistible pull, as if my very essence was being drawn toward it. Then came the final command, resonating not merely in my ears but within my mind, my chest, my bones. To survive, you must not only confess, you must live it, embrace it, become it. The apartment warped reality further, the walls dissolved, replaced by a vast, infinite expanse of shifting mirrors, each reflecting moments of my life in grotesque detail. Every act, every failure, every hidden desire was laid bare, multiplied into infinity. I could feel the weight of every sin pressing upon me, a crushing force that threatened to unravel my mind. I understood what the apartment demanded. To escape, I could not merely acknowledge my guilt, I had to inhabit it, accept it as part of myself without denial, without resistance. Trembling, I allowed my consciousness to sink into the reflections, letting the echoes of my sins flow through me. Every memory, every regret, every act of cowardice or cruelty became tangible, forming a tapestry that I could feel in my marrow. The apartment responded instantly, shadows receding slightly, the figure's light dimming in approval. And then the ultimate twist revealed itself. The apartment, the echoes, the shadows, they were not separate entities. They were extensions of me. Every manipulation, every horror, every reflection of guilt had been orchestrated by my own subconscious, by the part of me that had feared accountability, feared the truth, and feared self-confrontation. The room, the entity, the figure, they were all mirrors, constructs of my own mind, designed to force me to confront the totality of who I had become. The realization hit with a terrifying clarity, escape had never been external. It had always been internal. The echoes, once terrifying and alien, softened. The shadows no longer pressed, but hovered silently, waiting. The figures glowed dim to a calm, steady light, and I understood that the apartment's purpose had been fulfilled. I had faced my darkest truths, surrendered fully, and acknowledged every hidden part of myself. Reality, once fractured, began to solidify. The walls reformed, the ceiling lowered, the floor settled, and the echoes faded into a quiet hum. I rose to my feet, trembling, heart racing, and saw the room as it had first appeared, ordinary, mundane, yet somehow different. The journal lay open, blank, but I knew it held the record of my confrontation, a permanent testament to the truths I had embraced. The apartment, or the manifestation of my psyche, had vanished, leaving me alone but fundamentally changed. I understood now that the echoes would never truly leave, they would remain as a part of me, a reminder that self-deception is a prison far more potent than any physical confinement. As I stepped toward the door, ready to leave, I paused and glanced back. The room looked empty, harmless. But for the first time, I noticed the faintest shimmer in the air, a subtle vibration, as if the apartment were watching, not to torment, but to ensure vigilance. I exhaled slowly, heart still racing, and whispered to myself, I am accountable. I am aware. I am free, yet never free from truth. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Outside, the world was ordinary, bright, and oblivious. But I carried the weight of the echoes within me, the lessons learned, the truths embraced, and the understanding that the most terrifying rooms are not those built with walls and ceilings, but the ones built within the mind itself. The apartment and its terrifying manipulations were not supernatural but manifestations of the protagonist's own mind, forcing them to confront suppressed guilt, secrets, and denial. True horror lies in self-confrontation, the unavoidable reckoning with one's own hidden truths. Survival required full acknowledgement and integration of guilt, reshaping the protagonist's perception of self and reality. Though the protagonist is free, the echoes remain within, a permanent, haunting reminder that truth is never fully escapable, and self-deception can be more terrifying than any external horror.